Hi, my name is John, and today I'll be teaching you how you can maximize your chances to get into a selective school. Stay tuned.
Bing's Academy, where we learn and grow.
So back in 2008, when I did the selective school exam, I realized that a lot of the students who were my peers and people around me were just as smart as me. But I made it in and they didn't, despite them getting a very similar selective school mark. What I then realized was, although we did get in the 200s and everyone was about the same, a lot of their parents had a lot of misconceptions and they didn't really have a strategy in place, which was actually detrimental to their success. So even though we scored about the same, I ended up getting into Penrith High School and they didn't, because they didn't know the strategies that I'm going to now share with you today. Therefore, today I'll be sharing you the 3 key strategies and what you can use to maximize your chances and not make the same mistake I hear parents make every single year. I like to think of this using the CSS framework, which will help you remember and succeed in your upcoming selective school exam. So the first part of the CSS framework stands for consistency, or being consistent. A lot of parents just think that all you need to do is succeed in that one final exam and that's it. That determines your overall mark. But this is actually a fallacy and it's completely not true at all. Instead, you want to be consistent all the way throughout. So in year 5, from the very beginning of year 5, your school and your principal will be taking into consideration your test marks, your spelling marks, your dictation, every little thing that you do in your exam. And in October to December, they have to relay those marks and the grades to the actual selective school exam committee. So they take into consideration your internal mark, which you will get in a score out of 100 for both English and math, which is why if you only put in the effort in the beginning of year 6, for instance, there's absolutely no reason, because they already sent it in the year before. And on the contrary, on the flip side of things, when you only put in the effort in the beginning of year 5, but in the first half of year 5, your student or your child didn't actually put in the work, then you're not going to get the best possible mark, which is why you want to put in as much work in from the very beginning of year 5 all the way up to your selective exam. And the second part of the CSS framework actually stands for SMART. You have to be really tactical. Think about your overall objective. A lot of parents think that the main goal is to get into the highest possible selective school that their child can actually do. That is great and all, but you can't control all the variables that are at play. Instead, a better objective that I recommend is to really think about it into getting into a selective school in the first place. Because if you're in a selective school, even though it's not the highest selective school, you still have the chance to bunny hop from that and transfer into another higher ranked selective school if you're already in an existing selective school. So think about it like that. I see a lot of parents only putting in their 3 highest possible places for their schools. James Roos, for instance, Balcombe Hills and North Sydney Boys, which are very, very high up. Instead, I recommend applying for schools that have an entry score mark that differs by about 10. So for instance, Girraween, which is about 218, Penrith, which is about 210, and Parramatta, which is about 200. So all of those differs about 10, and it gives you a bit of a safety net instead of putting all your eggs into the one upper end of that basket. So it spreads out your chances, because you never know how your school will rank you in terms of your internal mark, as well as how you will actually perform in the actual selective exam. What happens if you're a little bit sick? What happens if you're giving a test format that you're a little bit uncomfortable with and you actually freeze up in? It's very hard to perform at your peak with all these different variables at play, which is why I do recommend applying to schools that have a bit of a range in them. I hear parents fall into this trap every single year, and this phenomenon is actually called the better than average heuristic, where if you had to evaluate your own abilities or the ability of your children, you would think that they're better than average. But if everyone thinks they're better than average, then that's not really average, right? So in order for you to get away from that, you want to make sure that you are looking from in an objective point of view, speak to as many people as possible. This is where I believe tutoring centers is actually a really good place for them to give you a unbiased evaluation on how they are performing, because this better than average heuristic and phenomenon is actually ingrained in our minds. Get someone else to evaluate them, speak to their teachers, get everyone else's opinion. The last part of the CSS framework actually stands for self-awareness. As a parent, you obviously love your child and you don't really want to see them fail. But as a parent, you have to take away the subjectivity and think about it in an objective lens. If they're struggling in NAPLAN, for instance, chances are they're not going to make it into a top selective school because their entry-level mark will be so high, and if they're struggling with NAPLAN, your chances are slim. Instead, you have to take away the bias and look at it from an objective lens. How they're doing in their NAPLAN, how they're doing in their exams, look at their marks, speak to their tutor, speak to their teachers. What are their opinions on what schools that they should apply to? It's very easy for a parent to think that their child is performing better than what is actually happening, which is why look at their exam marks. In conclusion, if you want to maximize your child's chances to get into a selective school, you need to follow the CSS framework that I just outlined. Be consistent, be smart in the application process, and absolutely be self-aware, and don't think that your child is better than they actually are. Also, it is very important for you to give this video a like if you did enjoy anything, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. See you guys.